I don't know the backgrounds of the participants, but for an energy company, this is quite ambitious because just the backgrounds of our workers are usually very male-focused studies, such as engineering and math. But nevertheless, we were not shy of putting the target out there, and Rachel will tell you guys later what we do to also achieve that. So obviously this is super high level. It goes also in the bucket what Alison talked about in terms of how do we communicate and to which stakeholders do we communicate in which way. I'm gonna in the next probably 10-15 minutes run you guys through how did we come up with the decision that DEI amongst others is a priority topic. What did we analyze? What was our approach and methodology, and also what did we do after? And I always try to do my focus obviously on DEI. So Alison, maybe you can jump to the next slide. So what you see now is basically a high level approach of our entire strategy project. It's nothing really fancy. It's actually quite basic. When you approach strategy projects, you always have roughly 3 phases. Phase A is that light blue shaded one, baselining and ambition setting. So here we check everything. What is already there? What is the status quo? And I can tell you, in a global company like RWE, which is internationally active, this exercise is quite lengthy because we have so many different business activities with different legal requirements, different stakeholders and drivers. Once we have collected all this data, we had a top management steerco actually with all CEOs and other relevant internal directors such as communication, investor relations, and others. We try to find a joint understanding, and I will show you that on a later slide as well, of sustainability definition and ambition, because ESG and sustainability is so broad, it means something different to every individual. So we needed to find a common ground to be sure for all the next steps we're always talking about the same thing, and we can refer to and I can also tell you that this definition has been tweaked and changed many times. It was kind of how do you say, a common joke on each of our steerco agendas to touch on that topic again. The second phase is a greenish, mintish colored phase, is the strategy development, where the actual strategic work happens. And you see here, we broke that down again in 4 parts. I will focus on the first 2. So we had to identify the material topics, so all topics that are of relevance to our business and the industry and sector we work in. Then we obviously, from a long list, we have to prioritize which are the ones we want to approach in a strategic matter. And then we set KPIs, targets. So one of the DI target was the one I showed you, 30% of women in management by 2030, and measures and action plans, where we also following and tracking these action plans from AG. But this is all more handed over to the actual functions. So I guess Rachel will tackle on that a little bit more. And the last phase, it's a platform building, which kind of goes also into the governance picture, in a sense of what are the processes behind, who is responsible for what, who works together, how do we want to work together, and how do we bring that data that we need in which processes and also into communication. But yeah, I think the next slide will show you. So we guys have also a joint understanding, the definition for us. So for RWE, sustainable business practices mean that we're preserving the environment, recognizing the interests of our stakeholders, as well as the needs for future generations. That's kind of, and thereby creating a long-term value. So it's not about here and now, it's also about the very long-term perspective, which is obviously a very challenging part for companies that are stock listed like us and have the stakeholder, the shareholder interest, which is usually short-term gains. And our ambition, that was also very an interesting discussion, because we have a wide range of peers. Some are completely entire renewable players, some have grids, some have more mixed portfolio like we do. And we said, for us, we would be successful if we will be recognized as a leading example for the responsible and rapid transformation towards a sustainable industrial company. Why do we do that? Because, as I said, we do have some historic business. We're still in also fossil fuel related power generation, which is needed and which needs to be the core part of the transition and transformation of the energy business. We cannot ignore that, and we are very much aware of that responsibility, and we want to drive that transformation as quickly as possible, but cannot always compare with someone who's a pure renewable player, for example. All right. Thinking of the box that I showed you earlier with the long list of material topics, we have identified various inputs, I want to say. So we looked first into ESG ratings. I don't know how much familiar you are, but many people know financial ratings such as Fitch or Moody's or others. This also exists for ESG. So there are various ratings out there that rank a company's performance in ESG. The difficulty with these ratings is that they all focus on something different, so they're not comparable, and that means for us in the company ourselves, we need to quite cover a big spectrum, which is a lot of work. Nevertheless, we ran in 2020 a so-called gap analysis, where we checked where are we getting points, where are we not getting points, so where are we good, where are we not so good, where do we have to catch up. And what you see here is basically the result, high level again, on of that gap analysis. And you see we kind of looked into on the horizontal, what is the impact, so how much would it move our ESG performance, and what is the effort, how much actually work or change would that need. So you kind of see low effort, high impact. It's not that much out there. So as low impact and high effort is also not very prominent. So mostly either low effort, low impact, or high effort, high impact, which is kind of saying that we as RWE have collected already all low-hanging fruits, which would be the low effort, high impact ones, and need to do, I don't want to say proper, I don't say we didn't do it properly before, but we need to do now a strategic approach. And mostly what was missing was data and targets. Diversity here is basically in the sweet spot in the middle. I put a little red frame around that. So that was our first impact, to A, collect the topics. You see each bubble is a different topic, and B, get a first understanding on where we are at in terms of our performance. The next thing we did, and Alison, you can jump to the next slide. The next thing we did is called a materiality assessment. And before I jump into the results, I want to explain to you the word double materiality. For anyone who does not know that, it's also what is required now from the CSRD, a new reporting requirement coming into force 2025. So double materiality means that we do not only look on what has an impact on our bottom line, so on our profits. We start looking in two ways. One is the impact the topic has on our company, which is usually measured in financial impact, but it can also be other risks, operational risks, and so on and so forth. So that's something we're more familiar with, because that's how we did it all the time. The new element is more on what is the impact of us as a company. So what impact does RWE have with their business activities on the certain topic? I think a no-brainer is obviously climate change. So if we continue burning fossil fuels, then we have a negative impact on climate change, but also higher regulation. If you continue to bet your money on fossil fuel heavy energy, and the regulation is or carbon prices are going up, then this is also having a negative impact. So another word which is used, and you maybe have picked up, is the impact by RWE, is the inside-out perspective, and the impact on RWE would be the outside-in perspective. So kind of remember these two perspectives. And then on the next slide, you can see kind of what we came out with, and I will explain how we got into that. So what you see now is that diversity, to put it that way, is at the moment, compared to the other topics, wouldn't achieve that much attention if we would just run by that. But let me explain how we came to that bubble chart. So when you do materiality assessment, you're supposed to review the stakeholders' interest. So the first thing we had to do is, who are our stakeholders? So we identified a various group. We had our employees, obviously, as a first group, and in their management and non-management, and also our different operational companies or business units. We had investors, we had NGOs, we had politicians, we had joint ventures or business partners, we had local communities, and so on and so forth. I think overall we had 10 to 12 groups of stakeholders. And then we developed ourselves a question that kind of asks questions covering both perspectives and a long list of topics. And yeah, what you see here is basically the outcome of that. So this bubble chart we have in multiple versions, so we can check how would it change if we only look on the investors' replies, if we only look on the employees' replies, how was the difference between management and non-management, and then these bubbles move. Yeah. So it's very important to say that this is only a snapshot in time. You know, sometimes we know it ourselves. On a Monday, we might answer different than on a Friday. And it's very different stakeholders that we have to still put into context. So that diversity, equity, inclusion, RWE is our company name, sorry, is down there, doesn't mean much. So then another, Alison, if you can jump to the next slide. Another thing we did was, or these are basically the 5 priority topics that came out of the wider stakeholder analysis, materiality analysis, and you see DI is sadly not included. And we also put in which were the one drivers. And when you go one further, Alison. Yeah. So what we did then was, because we know our company best, we wanted to understand the business impact, the business view on it. So we ran multiple workshops with our different business units and different topic owners to identify further priority topics. And here you see diversity and inclusion was named as one of our important priority topics. Yeah. And then the next one is I think that's the last perspective we had. We also checked our peers. So what are our peers doing? You see Enel, Iberdrola, Ørsted, Shell, these are all energy companies. So these are the ones we compared ourselves to. And we kind of checked how are they doing and how are they implementing the topics in their own strategies. And yeah, DI was more or less in the middle field. So once we had all the impacts of all these different perspectives, we then discussed with our top management which are the topics we want to focus on. And we came up with, doesn't mean that others are not important, but you need to prioritize and focus your efforts. And we came up with a 3x3 matrix. So again, in the ESG, cluster. And as you can see, all of these buckets have 3 priority topics. And staying on social, because that's a focus here today. So in social, we have social responsibility, we have DEI, diversity, equity, inclusion, and also occupational health and safety. We also identified ambitions or targets, which are the ones next to that. And we identified together, though, with the functions, a 1-year working plan or action plan. With the question was basically, what do we need to do in the next 12 months that enable us to do our first step towards this ambition? And we wrote it all down for a 1-year action plan. And this is kind of how we kicked it off. And developing this action plan was obviously very much in line and in collaboration with the functions. And maybe one last comment before I hand over to Rachel is some of these topics, I would say, have natural owners and are not much surprisingly. So for example, occupational health and safety is for developing company like us a no-brainer. It's very, very important. Some of our employees do very potential dangerous work, and their health and safety is obviously our highest priority. Hence, we have already very established huge departments doing health, covering this topic, such as diversity, equity, and inclusion as well. Other topics like climate change or biodiversity do not have already a home unit. So these ones we developed from our sustainability teams. All the topics that do have already a home function were handed over to the experts. And I think that's also what I would like to do now. I would like to hand over to Rachel as our head of diversity and inclusion, and also our expert on this topic in this call today. Thank you.
Cool. Thank you, Natalie, and thank you for everybody for joining. So I am Rachel Disney. I am the head of diversity and inclusion, and I sit in RWEAG, which is our holding company, head office in Essen, but I am personally based in the UK. What I would say is I only came into my role after all of this work had been done. So what I can tell you about and what I can talk about, now Natalie's kindly talked us through how the work was done, is what we then did with it. What I will say is this is not my normal conversation. I normally do not link my DE&I strategy and our activities back to the ESG work and this project. So it's actually been quite an interesting piece for me to work through as well, making those links almost backwards into the piece of work that was done then. So if I could have the next slide, please, Alison. So when the lenses and the framing that was used for the ESG strategy was done, they kind of looked at 3 main positionings. So I've stolen their little logo to use to frame what I'm going to talk to you about today. So starting with ESG ratings, and we kind of took that approach to the next level, and we looked at our own diversity and inclusion rankings and ratings, diversity and inclusion in ESG ratings, and did that evaluation. Also looked at our peers, what can we learn from our peers, and where is there pressure to act in the market, especially in terms of kind of employee engagement and employee attraction and retention. Looking at making sure we're engaging and communicating with the correct people. And also the third one, and this is where I probably get more into my comfort zone talking about it, it's much more about business need. And the focus on that was, how do we make our employees feel comfortable when they're at work? What do we need to do to engage on this agenda strategically, and how do we meet our targets as well? So I'm going to talk around this wheel as we go through. So the first thing we did was start looking at the rankings we were part of and assessing the current status quo. Again, a bit like Natalie's already talked about, we assessed these on a number of different factors. So what were the benefits we got from them? how much did they cost, how much individual workload was involved in completion, geographical reach in relation to our core markets as well, and what did we see as relevant? Where were we missing opportunities as well? However, there are a lot of bodies globally who offer such rankings and indices. Some of them have higher value than others for us. So we also kind of created these deciding factors. What do we actually want? What is important to us? So what we did is we kind of weighted some of these things, which is, as an international organization, how well known were the rankings or indices globally? How respected was it in the market by the various bodies of stakeholders, as Natalie's already spoken about? And where would we have a positive result? Now, by positive result, I don't mean, oh, do we score well? But we also have to acknowledge that in certain markets, we don't have a match between things like the data that we are allowed to gather in our organization and the information that is being requested. And therefore, there's like no value add for anybody involved if we can't actually submit half the information that's being requested. So that was kind of how we decided on where we needed to be on our indices and rankings. And then we continued through those decision points. So, not yet. Continued through those decision points and kind of looked at, okay, if these are all the questions, these are all the things that get looked at, what are we missing? And so we identified our quick wins, our medium-term wins, and our long-term adjustments, and that's kind of part of our program of what we're delivering now. Now, one of the things we did consider when we looked at these was less about dimensions. Some of them, might be weighted more because they were a bigger index. They looked at everything. Other things might have only focused on certain dimensions. We weren't worried about that as a deciding factor because we see different benefits from having both elements within our rankings and indices that we participate on. So kind of after looking at those quick wins and those long-term adjustments, we did then build out our next steps because there were some identified elements that we weren't great on. So we quickly initiated kind of activities and things we needed to do. So we have now got much more robust internal data analysis and much more robust reporting because of that, partially driven by that analysis, though it is a continual work in progress, as always. But we also recognised actually that we had a lot of things in place, but what they weren't were transparent or public. And sometimes they weren't global. So we knew we had everything locally, but we didn't have kind of a global overarching framework. And this was things that were really quick wins, really easy fixes. So we now have a group statement on diversity, equity, and inclusion, which is high level, because we know we need to create space for local needs, local requirements, local differences, and same on the group policy on discrimination and harassment. Again, it was nothing new to the group, but most of it was done more on an OPCO basis rather than as a global overarching policy. So now we have those in place and public to enable more transparency and have that clear framework. We're also made a clear decision not to be driven too much by what the rankings are. So there are elements of this where, and there can be some controversy about who's actually driving what agenda here. But there are a number of things that our DE&I strategy says we do not do. It's not how we operate, it's not what we want to be, and it's not where we want to go. So even though some of those things may lose us points, in one sense, we still don't drive our strategy just based off what the ESG ratings want. So then if we can move on to the next slide now, please. So then point 2 was peers. And to be honest, this is where I still think we have a lot more work to do. So we've started, again, we did the assessment, where are our networks, what do we participate in? And quite frankly, the outcome was really good in Germany. We've got some great networks in Germany. One of my teams on the board of Proud at Work. We're really closely connected with the Rhine-Ruhr network. But then when we started coming out, and that's fine because, you know, 85% or 75% of our employees are in Germany. But when we started kind of coming out from that and looking more global, this is where we potentially either had gaps or we had a lack of connectivity. So if I focus on the UK, because that's where we are, we do have some great connections with WISE, obviously Tide, OIC, Powerful Women and the Energy Leaders Coalition. But we still have quite a big piece of work to do to make sure we're leveraging that localized engagement across and bringing that knowledge sharing around the RWE group. What this also looked at was kind of the external view, maybe of employees. And over 2022, there was a big piece of work done on RWE's employer brand. And I'm really pleased to say our employer brand absolutely emphasizes diversity, equity, and inclusion as being a core pillar to RWE. It makes sure it kind of communicates it clearly, and it brings out certain elements that are really important to us. So you can, one of the strap lines is kind of, from here you can bring your unique perspectives, and it is embedded through that. So that was a really great piece of work. And then if we move on to point 3, which was business need. Now this is where I'm used to talking about more stuff. This is where we talk about what we do. And Natalie's already highlighted our strategic commitment, which is we create an equitable and inclusive working environment which promotes diversity. And we will strengthen the share of women in management, aiming for 30% in our core business by 2030. But what we needed to do when we looked at business needs, and I've tried to minimize this so I'm not going through a list of measures and initiatives and programs we've launched, was really kind of look at, okay, what do we need to do global and what do we need to do local? And the decision point is there is minimal activity that needs to be done globally. We will have some core requirements. So for example, there are a few core requirements on recruiting for executive level positions. However, everything else is absolutely driven down to the operating business level to say, well, what do you need? What does your market need? What does your area need? And what's going to work for you? Now, sometimes that's absolutely fine. We can all pick up and we'll go, actually, that's going to work for everybody. Let's work together and have that more as a global approach. Other times it's not going to work like that. So what we've been doing is we've kind of been partnering, businesses within the group have been partnering together to say, okay, what are the things we've learned from different places? Maybe 2 companies can partner together and develop something. And if it works really well, then maybe we can roll that out further. We've also been looking at really how do we communicate, how do we align, and how do we really engage with those stakeholders? So we have established a global communications kind of playbook and framework for communications for DE&I, and this builds on 3 main pillars for us. So one is focused on our inclusive culture. That doesn't mean we don't talk about dimensions or do things for dimensions if we don't need to, but we really think about our activities and how we talk about building our inclusive culture. We also talk about making the changes that matter, and this is really important to me. We make sure we don't do things just because somebody else thinks we should do things. We look at our context, we look at our systems and our processes, and we make sure that we do the things that really change our system and change our system for the better. There's a number of other things we've done. As Natalie, who is our chair of the Global Women's Network, we did support our employee networks in creating kind of a guiding document and some guidelines and principles to strengthen them. And I'm about to, I finished my water, this is not good. And we've also expanded our diversity ambassadors program, which you can kind of think of as an allyship program, but it's engaging with people all across RWE on a really low threshold approach on engaging with the engaging with the relevant topics. We offer short training sites. I'm going to have to go get a drink in a minute, so I'm going to be quick. And I've already talked about making sure we closed the identified gaps. Now, all of that does still link in with our people in the middle. So we have a huge amount of activities that we do, which I'm not going to go into in detail because I could talk for a decade. But hopefully that links how taking it from the ESG strategy piece of work, working that through, comes out to where we are now. And if Alison and Natalie could just take the first questions and do the Q&A while I go get another glass of water, it would be appreciated.
Well, thanks so much, and thanks also Natalie. In fact, I will stop screen sharing so we can see better what questions are out there. And yeah, hopefully that's been of interest to some of those of you on the call. And please do fire away with your questions. I can see that there is a chat. There's some stuff in chat. So if I scroll back up to make sure that we get so the first one I can see was for how implementation of ESG and EDI strategies can support improvement of social and economic well-being of poor and low socioeconomic groups of population and reduce social disparities. That sounds like a logical one for you, Natalie.
Yeah. Yeah, I think this goes in the social part, right? So if you remember the topics I put out there, community engagement or social engagement is also one important strategic pillar of ours in our social bucket. And what we do there is obviously we focus first on communities that might be impacted by our business activities. And we do aim to minimize, obviously avoid and minimize negative impact, but also seek a positive impact for local communities. If we then can focus that on low income or low socioeconomic groups, that would be obviously the best gain there. We cannot always do that by our business activities. Something would be, for example, creating jobs. There are always initiatives or projects we can do in terms of targetedly supporting these groups. When you think about I don't know, building schools or free services for these kind of groups, but this is not done strategically in each and every of our projects. We do focus on the communities that we do impact through our projects firstly, and then in a second try to see where else we can bring more economic well-being. I hope that answered the question.
Thanks, Natalie. And then we have another one. This may have been partly answered, I think, as you've gone along, but the question was, did you consider more data-driven approaches to materiality assessment? Why or why not?
So, I mean, I spoke to you high level. I mean, 10 minutes is not much for what we've did in the materiality assessment. Between each of the perspectives is obviously a lot of data coming it from open sources, coming it from research and science, coming it from consultancy databases, just to come up with the long list of potential material topics and just to drive the or develop the questionnaire that is behind the materiality assessment had a lot of research and data-driven impacts. So not sure what who also feel free to unmute what you meant by more data-driven and what you are missing.
Yeah, Natalie, as somebody who was on the receiving end of some of those questionnaires, it felt like we were being asked for some pretty concrete data to feed into the process. So yeah, I think
you can approve that it was pretty detailed, wasn't it? But yeah, I appreciate that we first of all I can't share in very much detail in general terms and also in time constraints.
So hopefully that answers the question. Then we have from Martin. What R&D innovation research has been carried out to fossil fuel emission neutralisation, which is separate to stopping using fossil fuels? There must be a net zero cost benefit impact analysis. That's possibly,
I mean, that goes, I can take that one. That goes very much into our climate bucket, which is not focused here. And I think the next one with the offsetting target, I want to answer both in the same way. So we do look into, I assume you mean stuff like direct carbon air capture and CCS technologies. We do look into those, especially because science has proven, the last IPCC report has proven, just stopping to emit carbon emissions is not enough. We do need to start filtering back out of the atmosphere. And we're looking into these things, as I said, direct carbon air capture or CCSS. But yeah, so it's been looked into. But not sure what else I should share here. And the offsetting thing goes in the same way. We do not build our strategy on offsets. We have a carbon neutral target. We want to be carbon or climate neutral actually by 2040. We have approved that by the SBTi and are in line with the 1.5 degrees path from 2030 onwards. And following the SBTi framework, SBTi stands for Science Based Target Initiative. And following this framework means you can only offset residual emissions. So only the last really little tiny bit that cannot be avoided can be used through offsets. And we're in 2023. So until we use those offsets, there's still some time. And the focus is on avoiding and minimization at the moment. But nevertheless, we are looking into offsets. We are monitoring the market, and we're also discussing internally what offsets would be okay and what not, because there's a huge difference in quality of these offsets. But not our focus and not our main strategy to reach our targets, our climate targets.
Yeah, and just to creep a final part of the question there about finance for recultivation, that's an area I'm actively involved in. Basically, our core approach is that when we initiate a project, right from the outset, we're setting aside provisions for recultivation, for demolition activities and such like. And very often it's a part of the planning consents that we get in the first place that we have to make that commitment to having the finance available for recultivation and repurposing at the end of the life of whatever asset it is that we're constructing. So yeah, that's something that's planned in from the outset rather than being something that we have to think about when we come to the end of life of something. Juliet from Tide, amongst other things, would RWE be willing to share the playbook? Is it publicly available?
If you're talking about my comms playbook, no, it's not publicly available. To be honest, it's not even publicly internally available. It's very much a guiding document for some leaders, mainly HR, communicate and internal communications, because it's very much about it's not about stopping anybody doing anything, right? It's something that we may not want to do in Germany, might be absolutely the correct thing to do in Singapore. We don't want to place too much framing about it. But what it does enable us to do is make sure everything we're doing is linking to one of our 3 pillars, which I think was another question.
Yes.
And we're talking about it and driving everything kind of in the same direction and with the same energy. So our nicely phrased key focus areas are an inclusion first culture, which is we're working on the foundations that foster a truly inclusive company culture, one that guides us in bringing an inclusive leadership style to life that aligns with our values, where we're all accountable for creating a strong D&I mindset, and where we understand how our differences and unique perspectives benefit the business. And then the second pillar is meaningful change that makes a measurable difference. which is we're focused on making systemic changes throughout our organisation that reduce and remove bias, changing our habits for good. We can build diverse teams driven by removing bias from recruitment processes, broadening our talent pool, and creating equitable talent processes. All of this will help make a positive and purposeful impact on DE&I across multiple processes, bringing practical differences to our business and the ways that we work. And then the third one is global strength and local expertise. Raising awareness of our DE&I work takes a global and local effort. We take culturally appropriate actions and create comms that are based on local insights and that everyone can get behind. This is how we build a team that reflects the places where we work, but ensures global consistency and respects the uniqueness of our people wherever they are in the world. Luckily, I had that on my screen because I can't actually remember all of that, to be honest. But I hope that answers the question.
Okay, and I think the next one's probably one for you as well, Rachel. I don't know whether you got time to go into the full detail of it, but we've got Shana asking how the Diversity Ambassadors Programme works, saying it's been a consideration for us. However, we've also challenged that this could take away the ownership from leads to include EDI into their day-to-day operation, which I don't think is an issue for our Ambassadors Programme in the way.
I was going to say, no, that's not really. I think we've positioned it very differently to that. So how we've positioned our ambassadors program is very much if you are an employee who has an interest in the topic, come along. We do like a quarterly call every 2 months. We do kind of a 30-minute to 45-minute inclusion bite, we call them, which is a little training. We do specific communications and support for them. We have obviously they have their own Teams channel and then communicate and engage on that as well.
And I think
I was going to say, you're an ambassador, Alison, you tell me.
Well, I was going to say, I do think we've seen a step up since you brought more focus onto, well, what are we going to do with these ambassadors? And the inclusion bites and so forth have been absolutely fantastic. I've learned so much from those personally. And I think another thing that the Ambassadors Programme is starting to be is also creating natural linkages between people within OPCOs to address OPCO related focus issues, because obviously being a big organisation and being international, you do have that local variation in priority topics and so on. So it's a great kind of platform, I think, also for.
And we've done our Diversity Ambassadors Buddy Programme, which is basically volunteers in the programme. We've linked people up across continents, across operating companies and continents, and we've actually given them, they don't have to use it, but kind of 6 half-hour meetings to have, that kind of structured exercises to do, things to do together, to really start building some of those communities and some of that engagement across our organisation. And they've been really well received as well.
Yeah. And then, yes, I need to give my apologies to Shmur because, sorry, I forgot to mention your name when reading out the question. So apologies for that. On to Kate's question then. Did RWE do the initial ESG project gap analysis and materiality all in-house, or did you have any support externally, e.g. from ESG specialist consultants, Natalie?
Short answer, no, we did not do it alone. It was a huge project. I think it took 6 months, and we had a fairly big consultant project, not an ESG specialized one. Short answer to that is they're too small. We needed a bigger project, plus giving the very strong climate focus and giving that this is very strongly strategically, not ESG strategically, but general company strategy. We needed the right experience and knowledge of the energy industry and also of our company specifics. So we had external work, 6 months, really big team, really expensive.
Yeah. Now we've got another question from Martin. Why did you leave retail if community engagement is often demand and opportunity driven? Martin, I think that's really a corporate strategy question, which is kind of outside the remit of this webinar and we weren't the people directly involved in that decision making. I think there's a fair amount of information out there on the web on RWE's various different strategic initiatives. So by all means, read up on that. Then we have a question from Claire, which I think again is one for Rachel. How are you working intersectionally, and is that embedded in your strategy?
It's not, I mean, everything kind of gets looked at from multiple different lenses. So when we're wanting to do things, but it doesn't stop us doing, we won't stop doing one thing because of another thing, but we will make sure, okay, how do we make things really work for everybody, and who are the different kind of people who could be impacted by the work we do. So it's just part of how we operate and how we think as a team and what we're trying to deliver.
Thanks. And then another question from Shmuel. What opportunities did the COVID-19 pandemic create for the development of ESG and EDI standards? I guess there's a sort of, if any, on that.
I was going to say that's a webinar in and of itself, I think.
Yes, I have to ask the Tide team maybe to find some volunteers for that one.
I can have a short answer on that. I mean, COVID-19 and also the Russian invasion to Croatia were sorry. I've just been on a conference in Croatia. I'm not really here yet. Have actually not been helping in ESG at all. They more or less took the focus off ESG. First, COVID-19 was a little bit of, you know, first climate change and COVID-19, and next will be biodiversity loss. These are big issues, but they're actually taking away the attention from top management to all the other topics, which makes it a bit difficult. They also take away the attention from the capital market and also funding. So for us in group sustainability, these topics were both not very opportunity creating to drive our strategies and develop further.
Okay, now I'm aware that we've gone over the 2 o'clock point, and it does look like the numbers are drifting away rapidly as people are moving on to their next meeting. So what I suggest is that we review any final questions and comments, and we can potentially answer them when we circulate information following this. So thanks to everybody so much for attending, and particular thanks on my part to Natalie and Rachel, who are extremely busy people, and I'm so grateful that they found the time to pull this together for us. And really don't know whether anybody else from within Tide wants to say anything at this point to round it off, or maybe to advertise the next webinar in the series. If so, please pick up the mic. Otherwise, I will end this webinar in just a couple of seconds. Okay, goodbye.
Thank you very much. Have a good day. Bye.
Thanks all. Bye.